Deanna, thank you for joining us. We wanted to pick your brain a little bit. This month is Self-Improvement Month, and we thought you might have some things to share. So first, I'd like to start off if you could tell us who you are, what you do, and your services that you provide.
Hi, Melissa, and everybody watching this. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for thinking of me. I am really a self-improvement coach in and of itself. My specialty is in hypnosis, and because I am a board-certified hypnotist for the last 22 years, typically every client I have is towards some type of self-improvement, whether it's a habit or something they want to get past. It could be mental, emotional. Sometimes there's even phobias and things like that. But all of it is about improving oneself. So I feel honored that you asked me, and I'm excited to be a part of this topic today.
Is self-improvement, is it best to approach it from that results-based thinking, or is it about the progress and recognizing that progress in your experience?
Yeah, I think it is about the progress. Absolutely. We all want that outcome, that result. And I think that it comes when you're focusing on the progress. And it also saves you a whole lot of anxious thoughts when you can actually focus on where you're at versus, the goal. In my work, I'm working with the psyche. And so between the mental and emotional process of that, people can work themselves up pretty fast. And I know that part of my job as their guide is to make sure that they are feeling good through the entire process, because I know it's going to go like this. There's going to be some dips. But when someone, it's part of the tools to teach people mindfulness and to be able to know how to slow down their own thought processes so it doesn't send them into that overthinking, that looping that can tend to be on the pathway to a goal. So I do have a way of measuring intangibles, and I'd love to share it with you guys. What I do in my sessions is we have an overall vision. When anybody works with me, I always say, okay, what is it you want? Why are we here? What do you want? And then I know the right questions to ask to know where we have to weave through to be able to get that result. And so about 4 or 5 sessions in is when and anybody could use this method, is when I sit down with them and I go, okay, I do an assessment and I say, okay, this is what you wanted. And in this area, so I have you get really specific of the areas of change that you were wanting to make. And when someone says, well, I want to change my behavior around showing up, in my team leadership, like let's say if it's at work, and I get easily triggered by controlling men or, something like that. And they're like, so now I'm working on changing that behavior. And that has been an actual topic of a client. So it's okay. But they want to change their behavior. Well, then it's really specific for them to break it down. So I'll say, okay, so what does that look like when you're in meetings now? When you are just going to the meeting, are you feeling that trepidation that you once felt before? And if you were to measure that from 1 to 10, 1 being no changes occurred, and 10 total transformation, where are you on that scale? And they'll typically say like, gosh, I'm like a 6 or a 7 now. It's like amazing. I'm mindful when I'm there, but I don't feel that anxiousness going into it. Right. And so what I do is I have them add a percentage to that. So if they say a 6, then I'll go, okay, that's a 60% change. And they're like, whoa, 60%? Like that's exciting. And we want to be able to have those kind of measurement tools, especially for when we're not just choosing an outcome as a result, but to measure the progress. There's always these little things that we can measure. And the measuring of it itself gives you motivation. And it gives you that reason, like to stay connected to the changes that you're working to make. So that's a really great process that anybody can use. Just put it with your own context.
It makes me think about what are some barriers that get in the way for people, either before they start their journey or once they get to maybe a plateau in their journey. What are some of the barriers that they come to when working with you?
I would say I'd call them blind spots or even subconscious set points, where you can only make so much change, and then you feel like you kind of hit your head on the ceiling. And in my work, what I would attribute that to is just the power of the subconscious mind, and that the subconscious mind holds all this data, all this information from our history, and then that history is influencing our current decision making. And our current decision making is 5% of our, every day. And then the rest of it is the automatic behavior. And so your brain does that for efficiency, but it can also really hold you back. If you have a blind spot around a pattern that is there and it's reoccurring without you even realizing it. So I love the 4 stages of competency. This was, you might have heard it before in your audience. I'll say it again for clarity. It was created by a psychologist in the 1950s, and we still use it to this day. And it is stage 1 of growth is unconscious incompetence. Stage 2 of growth is conscious incompetence. So that stage 2 is actually really great. It doesn't maybe sound all that great, but it is, because now you're developing awareness and you're actually conscious of where you're making mistakes, or conscious of the gap. Now, before, you didn't even know that a gap has existed. So that stage 2 is really important to differentiate. And so then as you work on it and you grow, stage 3 is conscious competence. So now you are really staying in the moment. You're really conscious of the choices that you're making, and your subconscious is letting go of the grip of that old pattern, and you're not falling into the rabbit hole like you used to and just getting triggered all over the place. I have a client right now she's in a corporate situation in a law firm, and they are having her work a lot of hours beyond what feels like good self-care for her. And she's finding herself not even being able to have a life outside of work. And then the workload on the weekend, because they might have a deadline on Monday, is carrying over into her life. And she just feels like she can't breathe. And so what she's been doing now is, when she shows up to a meeting, she gets triggered. She goes, you're making me work too much. And she gets heated. And she goes, I'm not even acting like myself. I'm not acting like how I even know myself to be. And so she's got some kind of pattern there. And when we traced it back, she goes, you know what? They make me feel like my dad. My dad was this guy that was just stoic, and he always was like discipline. I just have to do what he says. And she goes, it feels like my dad I'm under his thumb, just like I used to be. And this is an adult woman. So we want to really be able to be aware of our subconscious mind and those patterns, because they're not necessary. We got to get ourselves to the modern day. And so to that stage 3 is conscious competence is everything. And then 4 is even better, because now we have unconscious competence. That's where now you've crossed over the threshold. You have a new behavior, and it's now automatic, and it's working in your favor instead of against you. So I love the stages. I teach that a lot in my work, so that people have even more awareness of where they're at in the process.
The 4 stages of competency sound really useful for people who might be experiencing wait, but I feel like things are getting worse rather than better. I know that there can be times when we're learning where we kind of have a learning tantrum, right? Or we're doing something new and resistance comes up in us, or because it's a lot of new awareness, it can feel overwhelming, distracting, bring anxious thoughts or negative self-talk. The ego can pop in, right? Lots of things can happen during that time. And people might see that as, I'm not making progress, I'm backsliding, or see, I knew I couldn't do this, and maybe stop a little defeated a little early and feel that defeated pattern around the learning, where these 4 stages help to say there's a little bit of normalcy in the fact that it's going to come up into the conscious.
Yes.
And eventually and I think that is the goal that most of us would say we agree to have, regardless of what we're working on, is that it would become unconscious or subconscious.
Yeah, in that context, they mean one and the same. Yeah.
That change can just happen, and that life can be a little bit calmer and easier, and that it's happening what feels like more naturally because we've rewired a path or something.
Exactly. That's the whole point. I have another little technique that listeners can use, and it works wonderfully because it's so cognitive. Notice the difference between a trigger and a cue. Now, a trigger goes right into that automatic behavior. It makes you feel robbed of choice. Before you know it, you're in the rabbit hole and you can't see the light of day. And you feel like it just sucked you in and you're like, oh, here I am again. Similar to what you're talking about is like, oh man, I thought that was farther along than this, and inside my own process. And so what can really save you from even getting in the rabbit hole in the first place is, first of all, don't make it mean that you're backsliding just because you're having some kind of emotional response, right? That's normal. We're human to have emotional response. We always want emotion to really work in our favor. And so part of growing your emotional intelligence and to have self-awareness is to know how to recognize that you can just take it as a cue instead of a trigger. And you don't have to get so wrapped up into it and get upset or make it mean something it doesn't. You start with the head language. The brain's going to do what the brain does, but the mind is bigger than the brain. The mind has a vision for you, and it doesn't get caught up in the details of the brain chatter. It still holds the vision. And so to be cued is to see an experience as a choice. And to see the experience is like, oh, this is the moment of response. Instead of just, responding, but instead seeing it as a cue and going, okay, who do I want to be in this? Who do I want to be in this? And how does that align with my vision? How do I act in this? How do I be in this according to really where I'm trying to head? And so to be cued is way different than to be triggered. So I think triggers are actually an opportunity for growth versus I think that we need to change it, because right now everybody's talking about it in life like, oh, I got triggered. And that's the end. No, that's the beginning of new growth, because that now gives you something that you can go discover and really make conscious. All self-improvement is making the unconscious conscious. That's what it is. Making the unconscious conscious. And so it's an opportunity for growth and change.
Hey, I'm really enjoying having another word for that, right? Having the word cue, because there are moments where I feel like I do have a little more power or control or say in my response rather than in reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very comfortable with my emotions. I'm comfortable with sitting in them, feeling them, talking about them. And where I'm tuning in a bit more and really enjoying is connecting those emotions to the body, right? And physically, yes, what's happening in my body at this moment. And it tells us so much, right? It tells us if we're scared. It tells us if we're hungry. It tells us if we're tired. It tells us if something's happening even before we really understand sometimes that something is happening for us. Yep. And it could be cue, could be trigger. It's, that gut instinct feeling that people get. And so I think that you mentioned mindfulness earlier as well, and that the more we practice that mindfulness and kind of slowing down, we give the opportunity to have that conversation, I use that word lightly, with our body, with our emotion, with the thoughts that come with those pieces. And then we get to choose and kind of maybe what I think I'm picking up from you is almost practice the path that we want this to go on so that things can be lighter or be more conscious or change and make our lives lighter and easier. I heard recently someone say, I think it was on Instagram, and it was, my brain won't let me be happy. And the response was, that's not your brain's job. Your brain's job is to protect you. And I went,
yeah. Oh, this is why I say the brain is different from the mind. Yeah, absolutely. I can also drop another little technique for things for people to do is to recognize that there's an unconscious loop that's happening when we're talking to our body, or our brain, or our body cues us and is talking to us, as you're putting it. When that's happening, it happens so fast that you're not conscious of it. And it's a loop that involves a sensation in the body, a thought attached to it, and then an emotion attached to the thought. And then it just keeps reinforcing. That's how we actually get in anxiety in the first place. But we have an opportunity to turn it around and make it be what we want. And an example would be when I get up on stage, and I've done thousands of speaking gigs, I get up there and I might feel butterflies. My job is to make my butterflies fly in formation. So I want them to be in my favor, right? So I experience those butterflies, and I call it a sensation, because as soon as we call it something, now the brain has grabbed a hold of it, not the mind. The brain has grabbed a hold of it, and we're like, oh, that's what that is. So you might feel tightness in the chest. You're like, oh, I can feel myself getting anxious. You're already calling it something when it may not even be that at all, or it might be just a little moment that can pass, and you don't need to make it more than that. But when you make it more than that, that's when actually you get a buildup, and your mind gets very distracted from what you're over here trying to do. It happens to a lot of people when they get on camera, right, on Zoom, or they get on a stage, or they have to present to a board of directors, or some kind of high moment like that. You want to be able to manage your mind and emotions so that you can deliver with clarity. And so when you think about this little loop that happens, sensation, thought, emotion, you decide what that sensation means. You interpret it the way you want to interpret it when it's in your favor. So you can use this. It seems very simple, but I promise you practice this, it is like a superpower effect, what you can do with just that one technique.
And I believe that self-improvement is a journey, and sometimes you want that journey to be maybe a little more aggressive or a little more relaxed. Obviously, reaching out to people like you and having guides, or even just friends, family, accountability partners, cheerleaders in our corner when we are working on ourselves can be really helpful and useful. I wanted to review really quickly. There were 4 great tools that you gave us that we can kind of evaluate 1 to 10, change and improvement over time, and make it a percentage to get that results-based gratification during our process. The 4 stages of competency was helpful to know. Trigger versus cue, and the loop, that sensation loop that we get into. Is there anything else for our audience that you might want to share before we wrap up?
I do. I have so many little, I have hundreds of these techniques, and I use them all the time. But one of them that I think is really great around the area of behavior. A lot of times when people are making improvements, they want to change some sort of behavior, or AKA habit, right? So I have a process called the One Amazing Habit that I want to share with you guys. So let's say that you want to change a specific something, and you know that there's about 10 things you got to do to change that. So if it could be in business, it could be in health. Let's choose the health, though, to give it as an example. Because people love to be in like their healthiest, fittest body, right? So let's say that you are wanting to change the behavior of, stress eating, and you want to lose 15 pounds. And you're like, you know what? I want to trim back up. So you know what you got to do is you got to start drinking more water. You got to start eating more fruits and vegetables. You've got to not eat the snacks. That means you're probably got to be more focused on buying better groceries, having healthier foods in your refrigerator so that you'll actually eat them, but then you have to actually prepare them. So our list is already at like 8 things, right? Oh, and then you got to set your alarm, earlier in the morning so you can go for your exercise before the workday, and you got to get sure you be up. But that means that then before you go to bed, you got to go to bed earlier. The list is growing and growing. And you're like, but I want to lose weight. And so you're all in it for like 2 weeks. And then you crash and burn, because you can't possibly get all those things going, right? It's like the Chinese dishes, the plates, trying to get them all going at the same time. Only experts can do that. But what you can do is find and tease out the one amazing habit of the many. And so what you do is you get a piece of paper and a pen, write down all those habits. And then you look at them and intentionally kind of feel them out and go, when I do one, which one is it that I do? When I do that, it makes the other ones fall into place. And so what this is called a keystone habit. So you're looking for the keystone out of the many. And the keystone for you will do two things. It will, one, make the others have a cascade effect. So like if you go out exercise in the morning, you're probably more apt to come home and drink water right after you exercise. And then you're more apt to eat a healthy breakfast and then think about lunch. So you're going to pack something because you're like, you know what, I'm on this good track here. And then because you exercise in the morning means like now you are sleeping better at night. So it's working in your favor. Okay. It changes for people. It's not for most people. I've noticed about 70% of the time it is exercise in the morning. That seems to be the thing for people that really gets them on track. However, I have had clients that say, you know what, when I just prepare my foods, it makes everything fall into place. Because then I feel good when I'm eating good, and then it makes me want to exercise. And then I feel prepared for the day. I don't have those moments where I'm just grabbing at the pretzels at work, kind of thing. So it's called a one amazing habit. And the reason that it's also powerful is because it changes your identity. So what I mean by that is, let's say if it's exercise, then you become an exerciser. So you're not just practicing a habit, but you're going, yeah, I'm a runner. I'm a runner. I run every morning. Now you've labeled yourself as an identity, and you are a person who exercises versus trying to become a person who exercises, right? There's a difference. So this one amazing habit technique will help you tease out the one thing that has a lot of power to it, that's also will get in your psyche, and it'll make you show up like that every day. So you can use this in the context of business. I've used it in business where I realized that my disorganization, I would make it mean lots of things. And then I thought, you know what, if the one thing out of all the things I have to do in my business, which I'm wearing a lot of hats, all of us are wearing a lot of hats, if I just stay organized, then it makes everything else fall into place. I know my bookkeeping is on track, my taxes are on track, my marketing's on track, because I'm organized and I'm forecasting what's going to happen. And that was one that took me a long time to learn. But once I did, it was Keystone Habit. So now I feel like I'm an actual businesswoman versus always trying to keep up, or like, I wish I could be like them. So the one amazing habit.
That's great. I love that. And as you were talking through, that's the example with, I want to be healthier and I want to do this and that. And here's all the things. I mean, my brain was like, yeah, here are the 12, 13, 14, 15, like all the pieces that go into that. And then when you said, what's that one thing? I actually realized for me, it is sleep. So if I had focused on maybe going to bed earlier, letting that be the one thing I focus on, I'm going to get better sleep. I'm going to wake up earlier, more naturally. I'm going to start my day better. I'm going to eat better. So I was like, oh yeah, it's always been sleep as well.
That's right. And you have to put boundaries around that. Like once you know what it is, honor it. Like honor it and put boundaries around. Don't let people steal that from you, or projects. You've got to honor that one thing, because it's the one thing that makes everything else happen.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deanna, for taking the time to chat with me about self-improvement for Self-Improvement Month. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.